Get medics and security down there now.
911, what's your emergency?
It's the trainer! She's not coming up! The Orca attacked her! He's still holding her underwater! Please, you have to hurry!
The panic in the caller's voice was unmistakable. What was supposed to be a magical afternoon at Oceanica Park turned into something no one could have predicted. Something they'll never forget. Beneath the cheers and staged choreography, a silent threat had been building. And when it broke the surface, it shattered everything. This isn't just the story of a tragic accident. This is the story of Mira Landon, an extraordinary trainer, a devoted protector, and a woman who believed in partnership over power. It's the story of Kael, a massive orca held in a world far from the ocean he was born to roam. And it's the story of a moment that forced the world to reckon with the price of performance. If this story moves you, please like, share, and subscribe to support more real stories that need to be heard. Mira Landon stood at the edge of the performance tank, her black wetsuit slick with salt mist, the roar of the crowd swelling around her like a rising tide. The filtered sunlight poured through the arched glass of the Azure Dome Theater, casting moving reflections across the water's surface. Beneath those glimmering waves, Kael traced a slow, deliberate path, his massive body cutting through the pool with grace that belied his size. To the audience, it was another afternoon escape into wonder, an orca gliding through choreography, a trainer commanding nature with effortless charm. But for Mira, it was never just about performance. This was a conversation, one conducted through movement, breath, and presence. The show was called Majesty of the Deep, but what mattered to her happened in the silences between the cues. From the moment she first heard a whale's call on a school field trip, something inside her shifted. Other children rushed to the gift shop. Mira stayed behind, pressed against the glass, mesmerized. While her classmates lost interest, she began borrowing books on marine life. By age 10, she could imitate orca vocalizations with startling accuracy. At 16, she was waking at dawn to clean tanks and log behavior notes at her local aquarium. College brought long hours in labs and the occasional grant for fieldwork, but Mira lived for the water and the creatures who lived within it. Oceanica Park recruited her the summer after she graduated. The interview was brief. A senior trainer had watched her volunteer sessions and said simply, "She reads the water." Kael had been her first assignment. He was older than the others, larger, with a history. Some whispered that he was too unpredictable, but Mira approached him differently. She didn't command. She listened. Over time, their sessions evolved into a delicate exchange, mutual signals of trust. Her hand gestures were subtle, his responses fluid. It was more dance than direction. Years passed. Their routines became crowd favorites. Guests remembered her name. Children waved from the glass walls, eyes wide in awe. Mira always smiled, but her focus remained on Kael. She knew every flick of his dorsal fin, every breath cadence, every hesitation. Lately, those hesitations had grown longer. Kael floated near the surface more often, eyes just below the waterline, distant. Mira had started lingering after rehearsals, watching him with quiet concern. Maybe he was just tired. Maybe he needed more enrichment. She made notes, submitted requests. Nothing urgent, just observations. On the afternoon of the 24th, Mira stepped onto the platform with her usual ease. Her headset was in place, her routine memorized. The crowd was full. Kael surfaced on cue, sending a curtain of mist over the front row. Laughter rippled through the air. Mira offered her first signal, calm and familiar. Kael responded, "It all looked perfect." Oceanica Park was designed to dazzle. From the moment guests stepped through the entrance, the illusion took hold. Bright murals of sea creatures, ambient ocean sounds playing from hidden speakers, and sleek pathways leading to towering enclosures with crystalline water. It was a place where wild met wonder, where families cheered for animals they would never meet in the open sea. The architects called it immersive. The brochures called it magical. But behind the plexiglass smiles and carefully timed shows, a different world existed, one Mira Landon had come to know intimately. Each morning before the gates opened, she walked the still halls, past tanks that hummed softly in the quiet. Her clipboard always rested in her arm, but it was habit more than necessity. What she really carried was the weight of knowing too much. Kael's file wasn't stored on public drives. It lived in the back office archives, printed and redacted, with whole pages blacked out. Mira read it in pieces during her first year. Some pages passed discreetly by older staff, others accessed when no one was watching. The pattern was impossible to ignore. In 1993, a trainer at a partner facility had drowned during a routine interaction. The incident was labeled a tragic accident. In 2001, a young man was discovered dead inside Kael's enclosure after hours. It was blamed on trespassing. No charges, no follow-up. When Mira first asked why Kael remained in rotation, her mentor looked away before replying, "He draws the biggest crowd." The subtext was clear value, not safety, determined legacy. Still, Mira couldn't abandon what she saw in him. Kael wasn't just a performer. He was intelligent, responsive, sometimes even playful. Their connection, forged over time, had become the highlight of her work. She wasn't blind to the risks, but she believed behavior could evolve, that kindness could rebuild trust. Years earlier, Dr. Rosalie Chen had warned in a behavioral report that prolonged captivity in orcas, especially dominant males, could result in persistent agitation. "It's not aggression," she wrote, "it's compression, emotional pressure with nowhere to go." Her research had been quietly shelved after a new marketing campaign rolled out. The timing never felt like a coincidence. In the days before the show, Mira noted small changes in Kael. He was less responsive to underwater clickers. He drifted at the surface for long stretches, jaw popping gently, an orca's way of warning or asserting space. During rehearsals, he skipped a signal entirely, something he hadn't done in years. Mira documented it, submitted her log, and moved on. No escalation protocols were triggered. Late one night, she stood alone at his tank. The water reflected only moonlight and stillness. Kael floated near the edge, unmoving, his eye just above the surface. Mira whispered his name, and for a moment, he blinked. She reached out, palm to the glass. She wanted to believe they were still in sync, but sometimes, even the strongest current holds a quiet rift. The afternoon sunlight poured gently through the semi-open roof of the Azure Dome Theater, casting liquid reflections across the pool's surface. It was nearly 2 p.m. when Mira stood behind the performance gate, her fingers adjusting the last fold of her wetsuit. She tapped her earpiece, listened for the familiar buzz of connection, then glanced up at the tech booth. A subtle nod confirmed everything was ready. Kael floated motionless near the far side of the tank, his dorsal fin slicing gently above the surface. From a distance, he looked peaceful, even statuesque, an ancient shape moving through borrowed water. The stands above gradually filled with the rustle of excitement, parents balancing cameras, children leaning forward on tiptoes, snack vendors weaving through aisles. For them, this was simply the next act in a day full of attractions. The opening sequence unfolded exactly as planned. Mira entered with poise, stepping confidently onto the stage platform. Her first cue, an open-arm signal, sent Kael into a wide breach, his body crashing down with a dramatic splash that drenched the front row. The audience erupted into applause. Mira gave a small grin and moved seamlessly into the next motion, a spin directive. Kael complied, twisting midair before landing with precision. For a moment, the world seemed perfectly in rhythm. But then, small deviations began to surface. Kael paused longer than usual before gliding onto the shallow platform. His spin at center stage slowed midway through, and his tail slapped the water with greater force than usual, sending low, heavy ripples across the pool. Mira felt the reverberations beneath her feet. It wasn't aggression, not exactly just something slightly out of sync. Still, she continued, adjusting her tempo and body posture, a slower arm sweep, a softer step back. She had trained with him for years. This wasn't the first time he'd needed space to settle. She guided him through the final stretch of the routine, the one designed to showcase trust, the close contact sequence. Mira stepped onto the submerged platform, water brushing her knees, her stance firm and measured. Kael drifted toward her in a slow arc. She extended her right arm, signaling the side swim they had performed countless times before. He responded by dipping below the surface, as expected. Seconds passed. The surface stayed still, A quiet murmur began in the upper rows. Mira glanced down, waiting, tilting slightly to scan the tank. No dorsal fin, no rise of breath. The moment lingered. Then, the calm was broken not by applause, not by cue, but by a sudden eruption of spray and force. The moment everything unraveled, time seemed to slow. The theater's pulse shifted, cheers gave way to confusion, then to a silence so absolute it felt like the air itself had thinned. The familiar structure of the show, so carefully rehearsed and repeated, fractured in an instant. From the edge of the platform, staff began moving with mechanical urgency, each motion honed by drills they hoped they'd never use. A whistle pierced the air, red flags waved from the tech booth. Nets were thrown into the water, bait fish followed, though no one truly believed they would help. Kael's sleek form could still be seen beneath the glass, circling tighter now. The stillness of his previous patterns had vanished, replaced by agitation that no cue could interrupt. In the control panel room, a staff member triggered the tone generator. The frequency it emitted was sharp, engineered to pull an Orca's attention away from any focused behavior, but Kael didn't react. He remained locked in his path, unshaken by the noise. From the far side of the tank, a child let out a sharp cry. Kael had surfaced briefly long enough to reveal Mira's torn wetsuit, her body slack against the swell. 3 minutes passed, then 5. A handler knelt near the medical pool gate, calling to Kael in a voice that cracked under strain. Another shouted Mira's name, over and over, as if sound alone could reach her. Her headset, once the link between her and her team, lay broken and useless on the wet platform. The show's music had long since stopped, leaving only the muffled churn of water and the rising hum of emergency radios. At 7 minutes, Kael stilled. He loosened his grip. Mira's body rose slowly to the surface, face turned downward. Divers entered the tank within seconds. They moved quickly but without commotion, lifting her from the water with practiced precision. On the platform, CPR began under tense coordination. There was no voice narration now, no applause cues, only the hiss of oxygen and the quiet sound of trainers trying to keep rhythm as they pressed against a chest that would not rise. At 2:41 p.m., the attending medical team gave their final signal. The stands had emptied quietly. Families filed out without speaking, past concession booths that were still open, past signs advertising showtimes that no longer mattered. There were no curtains to draw, no announcement of cancellation, just water still lapping at the pool walls, reflecting the sun like nothing had happened. And at the center of it all, the silence remained unmoved, unanswered, vast. The hours that followed were strangely muted, as if the park itself had forgotten how to breathe. Oceanica's once lively walkways were nearly empty, save for the slow shuffle of remaining guests being escorted out by staff. Souvenir stands still hummed with recorded ocean sounds and upbeat music, an awkward contrast to the weight that now hung over everything. In the distance, announcements were silenced, and the digital marquee listing showtimes flickered uncertainly, as if reluctant to admit what had just happened. Inside the staff compound, the stillness took on a different shape. Heavy, thick, immovable. No one knew what to say. Some stood by the lockers in stunned silence. Others sat on benches with eyes that didn't blink, staring at the tiled floor. A few wept quietly in the break room, heads buried in their hands, the sound muffled by walls that had never held such grief. The public statement arrived quickly. It was clinical and composed. We are heartbroken to confirm the passing of Mira Landon, one of our most experienced and cherished trainers. We are cooperating fully with the Maritime Safety Board in their investigation. There were no further details, no mention of Kael's history, no acknowledgement of the subtle warnings Mira had once noted in her logs. Behind closed doors, the incident was dissected in silence. A small group of senior staff watched the footage from that afternoon, frame by frame, their faces fixed in expressions that shifted only slightly with each repeat. The camera angles offered no comfort, only a confirmation that what had been feared in some quiet part of every trainer's mind had finally happened. The emergency procedures they had practiced so many times felt distant now, like instructions from a different world. Kael was moved to the medical pool. He floated near the surface, motionless, refusing food, ignoring cues. Dr. Fiona Alden, brought in once more for post-incident behavioral review, sat with his file in her lap, its pages filled with past warnings no one had acted on. Years ago, she had flagged signs of psychological stress and abnormal patterns of behavior. The report had been acknowledged, then archived. Now, it sat open in her hands, every line carrying a new kind of weight. The autopsy arrived 2 days later. The findings were stark: multiple internal injuries, fractures across the ribcage, hemorrhaging near the lungs, though drowning was listed as the cause of death. The coroner's note made one thing clear: Mira may not have survived the impact, even if she'd been rescued in time. The headlines came swiftly. They didn't soften the truth. Veteran trainer dies during show. Oceanica in crisis. Killer whale or killer system within days. The entrance to the park was transformed. Flowers appeared at the gates. Posters bearing Mira's photo leaned against stone walls. Some visitors came to mourn. Others came to demand change. Wonder had given way to grief, and grief was becoming something louder. The first banner appeared 3 days after the accident, hand-painted in bold red letters. It read, "Mira deserved better." It hung quietly outside the main entrance, tied between two metal poles near the guest services desk. By the weekend, the banner had company. Signs lined the sidewalk, some carried by solemn faces, others placed gently on the ground beside flowers and candles. There were messages of sorrow, of outrage, of disbelief. Some protesters chanted, others stood in silence. The mood was as layered as the story itself. Media crews soon arrived. Cameras pointed toward the gates that had once welcomed school buses and birthday parties. Oceanica's glossy brochures and carefully crafted PR language could no longer hold back the questions now flooding in. The narrative was changing, and no amount of staged smiles could reverse it. Then came the voices from within. Former trainers stepped forward, some reluctantly, others with urgency. One recalled submitting a series of behavioral reports documenting Kael's increasing unpredictability episodes that were acknowledged internally but never addressed publicly. Another described the quiet pressure to keep shows running, to maintain the illusion of control, even when the animals signaled distress. The more stories emerged, the clearer the picture became. This hadn't been a single, unforeseeable tragedy. It had been a failure to listen. Dr. Fiona Alden appeared on a national news broadcast days later, dressed simply. She spoke not with anger, but with clarity. "Orcas in captivity are ticking clocks," she said. "You can suppress instinct, but you can't erase it. Confinement doesn't just change behavior, it changes the being itself." With her words, Kael's past returned to the surface. Archived reports began circulating online: the drowning of a young trainer at a partner facility, a nighttime intruder found lifeless near the tank. Incidents previously hidden beneath legal phrasing and internal memos were now part of the public discourse. While the world debated, Mira's family remained quiet. Her sister issued a brief message through a friend Mira believed in connection, not control. She gave everything to those animals. She should have been protected, too. It was not a demand, only a truth, one that lingered. Oceanica launched an internal review. Shows involving direct contact were halted. Trainers no longer entered the water. Kael was placed under strict observation, kept in a back enclosure rarely shown to the public. Some staff avoided the area altogether. Others couldn't stay away. They left food along the ledge, murmured greetings, and sat beside the tank long after their shifts ended. No one expected a response. Still, they came. Kael remained still, suspended beneath the surface. He drifted just past the reach of light, just beyond the understanding of the crowd that had once applauded his every move. He was no longer the center of a performance. He had become the center of a question, a silent reminder of all that had been missed. Oceanica Park responded quickly, at least on paper. A new division was created with a focus on safety oversight. Training protocols were rewritten. Emergency procedures were expanded and tested weekly. Trainers were removed from water-based routines. Outside consultants were brought in to reevaluate animal welfare. Polished statements were sent to the press, expressing sorrow and commitment to change. But for those within the park, the measures felt hollow. Too measured, too late. Beyond the gates, the conversation had already moved. Social media surged with images of Mira smiling beside Kael, her hand pressed gently to the tank wall. The hashtag #JustJosh, Justice for Mira, trended within hours. News specials dissected the culture of marine parks. Filmmakers raced to secure interviews. Legislators, once silent on the matter, called for renewed debate over the legality of orca captivity. Public opinion had shifted. It wasn't just about a single tragedy anymore. It was about the system that allowed it. Donations flooded conservation groups. Marine sanctuaries released public plans for expanded facilities. Advocacy networks gained thousands of new voices. People had stopped just watching, they had started asking. But inside Oceanica, things moved differently. The main performance stage stood untouched. The seats, once full of awe and energy, remained empty. No music played. The air inside the Azure Dome Theater carried a stillness that nothing could replace. Visitors passed Kael's tank with uncertainty. Children pressed their palms to the glass, but didn't cheer. Parents lingered behind, unsure whether to explain or move along. Kael no longer breached, no longer circled on cue. His form drifted silently in the distance, more shadow than spectacle. Mira's colleagues gathered one evening without cameras, without announcements. They wore their wetsuits not to perform, but to remember. Flowers were placed on the surface of the water, drifting gently in the soft lights overhead. No speeches were given. Silence spoke louder. Her locker remained untouched. The key hung from a hook. Her nameplate, a simple strip of metal with engraved letters, hadn't been removed. It became a quiet monument, visited often, spoken of rarely. The Mira Landon Foundation formed within weeks. Her family channeled grief into something lasting: grants for marine science students, resources for trainer safety, support for reform in animal care practices. Her name reached spaces she had only dreamed of: classrooms, government hearings, international conferences. She had always wanted to make a difference. Now, she was still. The question haunted every discussion. Could it have been prevented? Some believed Kael bore the blame. Others argued he had simply responded as any captive predator might, after a lifetime in confinement. But beneath the theories and opinions, one truth remained. Kael was not a villain. He was a reflection. His silence mirrored everything that had gone unsaid, everything dismissed, everything buried beneath applause. 6 months after the tragedy, Oceanica drained the Azure Dome Theater tank. The announcement framed it as routine maintenance, citing infrastructure updates and long-term planning. But no one believed that was the real reason. The empty pool stood as a quiet admission. The Orca program, once the heart of Oceanica's brand, was over. There was no farewell show, no media send-off, just a drained stage, a hollow space where spectacle used to live. Kael was relocated quietly, moved under the cover of early morning light. His new home, according to internal records, was a coastal holding facility. The exact location was not disclosed. On paper, he was listed simply as retired. In truth, he disappeared into silence, far from the crowds that once cheered his name. Yet the absence of the whale was not the end of the story. Mira Landon's presence remained not in the form of tributes or statues, but in the conversations she had sparked. Her image was held up by conservation groups calling for reform. Legislators used her name in hearings on captive marine life. Parents, once eager to bring their children to marine parks, now hesitated, choosing documentaries over front-row seats. Oceanica shifted its mission. Gone were the high-energy performances and choreographed leaps. In their place came educational tours, rescue exhibits, and behind-the-scenes views into rehabilitation. The park, once a temple to entertainment, was now trying to become something more reflective, something quieter. For those who had known Mira, none of it erased what had been lost. Her absence lingered in the corners of the staff break room, in the untouched contents of her locker, in the subtle glances exchanged by those who remembered her laughter during morning walkthroughs. Some trainers still visited the edge of the now dry tank, their fingers brushing the railing as if expecting to hear her voice return in the echo. Mira's foundation continued to grow, funding research, providing scholarships, and supporting ethical standards in marine care. Her influence extended beyond the facility where she had once performed. She became a symbol not of tragedy alone, but of the need to reimagine how humans relate to the wild. And in the quiet that followed, a question emerged, not one of blame, but of reflection. Can we truly love what we insist on owning, Does partnership mean anything when born from control? And if we are willing to celebrate connection, can we also learn to listen to discomfort? Mira's story did not end in silence. It awakened something. A shift, a pause, a recognition that maybe the applause had drowned out what mattered most. She had believed in respect, in empathy, in shared space. And through the cost of her devotion, the world was finally beginning to ask the questions she'd carried alone for too long. Mira Landon's story is not just a tragedy, it's a reflection of everything we've overlooked in the name of wonder. She believed in trust, not control, in connection, not performance, but her devotion was not enough to protect her from the system she gave her life to. And Kael, the orca she loved, became the silent messenger of a truth long ignored, that wildness cannot be choreographed, and that confinement comes with a cost no tank can contain. Her death wasn't the end, it was the turning point. It challenged policies, shifted public awareness, and opened the door to hard questions about captivity, ethics, and our responsibility to the creatures we claim to care for. As we move forward, may we remember that true respect begins with listening not to applause, but to warning signs, and that sometimes the most powerful voices are the ones silenced too soon. If this story made you think, feel, or pause, please like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us keep telling the stories that matter, the ones that need to be heard.